The Second World War is overdone. This is obvious if you've tried to watch any war film made over the last 70 years. As, despite the fact that it was obviously incredibly important and still sadly shapes the socio-political paradigm that we find ourselves in, it's also become incredibly stale. After all, how many times are we going to watch the exact same movie about Guga Johnny Yank, who is very bluntly lore-dumped to be a Jew and or a Polish person, malinger around the Western Front, spout off some thinly veiled contemporary politics, before partaking in a stupidly over-the-top power fantasy because Guga Johnny Yank is a pretty cool guy that doesn't afraid of anything? Childish ranting about Hollywood aside, today we will be covering the exploits of a man who will need no introduction if you're a Nordie of the Paisley persuasion. A plucky Paddy who pounded Jerry German across North Africa and was one of the de facto founding fathers of contemporary Special Forces doctrine. Regionally legendary, but officially speaking, not widely recognised. The Mick Marauder, Paddy Mayne. Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. Why is nobody talking about these hidden performance experiments connected to the US military? Or you haven't heard about it? Well then you just might be a little bit silly, so just hear what jabroni Tony Robbins has to say in this clip.
Now check this out. Your sirtuins do two things. First, they turn on and off genes. Well, they also have a competing component, because they can only do so much, which is cleaning up your DNA. These sirtuins have a fuel that you've probably heard of called NAD. So NAD is wonderful, but NAD is a size molecule that, as you probably know, needs a precursor called NMN to actually get into the body. For 2 years, top secret, they have been working with our military, with our special forces. And about a month and a half ago in Boston, the commander got so excited, he slipped the beans. And it was just in the Daily Mail last week as well. He didn't tell all of it, and I know more because I've invested in the company. I can't tell you exact things, but I can tell you what's been reported. What's been reported is the commander said, these are the strongest humans alive, both men and women in the special forces, and most of the people, right? Endurance has exploded, he said, very much like the mice. He said, secondly, muscle development has completely changed from the same stimulus, like the same workout, they're getting more muscle. And then thirdly, the most important thing for them is cognition has gone through the roof, because when you're exhausted and you're out there in special forces, the ability to use your head is the more valuable than your body.
Gosh golly gee whiz, isn't that crazy? Well, David Sinclair's team first tested this compound in mice, and after just 14 days of NMN, the mice ran 200 to 300% more than even the youngest in the group. It's since been studied in human performance and military resilience programs with similar findings. Turns out if mice can run faster, it means humans are tougher to kill. Interesting. So when Tony Robbins references it, it's not hype. It's about restoring mitochondrial function as well as helping cells produce energy more efficiently. NAD levels are high when you're young, but by around the age of 40, they drop by roughly 50%, contributing to lower energy and slower recovery. And, as Gary Breaker often explains, the body doesn't use NAD directly, it relies on precursors like NMN.
You know, NAD, it's actually not NAD, it's NAD+, and that little positive is the reduced form of NAD, which means that charge can't really pass through first-pass metabolism. You can't just drop NAD into the stomach, it will just immediately dissociate.
Restoring NAD isn't about looking younger, it's about slowing the cellular decline that people accept as just normal aging. Lower energy, slower recovery, and a body that stops responding the way it used to. Europe banned NMN in 2022, not for safety, but because it works too well. Big Pharma is developing a $3,000 version of this. So, they're just trying to ban the cheaper version. Classic move, you know, price out everybody but the rich from reducing aging. The NMN that I use is Black Forest NMN. It's GMO-free, made in the United States, and it includes piperine for around 30% better absorption. And the best part is that Black Forest just launched their biggest deal of the year, and it's absolutely insane. Buy one, get one completely free. Available for 48 hours only. And yes, you heard that right, buy one, get one free on their flagship NMN supplement. And this deal ends in 48 hours, and when it's over, it's gone for good. We begin in Newtonards, County Down, Kingdom of Ireland, United Kingdom, where on the 11th of January 1915, Robert Blair Mayne was born as the third son of 7 children. He was born into a family of landed Ulster Scotsmen who were successful merchants and ragingly Presbyterian, owning a wine and grocery shop alongside a myriad of other businesses and establishments all across County Down. That is to say that he was never really wanting as a boy, being sent to Newtonards Academy, now the Regent House Grammar School. Like a true red-blooded Briton of the lower gentry, Blair, as he was known as at the time, was apparently a reserved and gangly child. Yet he still picked up his fair share of physical recreation, partaking in such things like cricket, golf, marksmanship, even joining his local rifle club, and what he was undeniably the best at: rugby. After all, he is Irish. They are spiritually black and genetically reared for hard labour and groupthink. So, as a result, the Irish are absolutely fucking cracked when it comes to rugby. Which is very, very annoying as a Scotland fan. However, don't go getting the impression that he was some Ulster jock. Because upon passing through school, he found himself going to Queen's University to pursue a law degree in the hopes of becoming a solicitor. Not exactly the expected life path for scrumlord and ball thrower Blair. However, just because he was learning to beat people with rhetoric in a legal sense, it doesn't mean that he wasn't without the ability to beat people physically either. Because, whilst he was in university, he decided to pick up boxing. Apparently, managing to become the Irish University's heavyweight champion in August of 1936. And by managing to reach the finals in the British University's heavyweight championship. That is to say, the 6'3", 217 pounds McMonster could throw a mean right hook at you and could adequately defend himself in court afterwards. Not the type of guy that you would want to cross. But he wasn't one to fret, because at least his golf career was also going quite well, managing to secure himself the Scrabble Golf Club President's Cup in 1937. Now, I have no idea at all if that's particularly good or not, because I know fuck all about golf. I know, I'm a shite Scotsman in that regard. However, it is a great big cup, so I'm assuming that's at least somewhat prestigious. Then there's his rugby. And there was a bit more going on there. He debuted against Wales in 1937, going on to gain enough caps to be selected for the 1938 British Isles tour to South Africa, being a forward lock and one of 8 paddies to actually attend the event. He very quickly distinguished himself in the eyes of the South African press for being, quote, outstanding in a pack which gamely and untiringly stood up to the tremendous task. I know, that is quite the compliment. It almost makes you think that Britain didn't lose that test against the mighty Springbok, who are almost identical to the Irish, except some of them actually are black. However, it's worth noting that Blair's competitive streak and can-do attitude would supposedly mutate into something a little bit more boisterous and brutish, with him being known to just burst into teammates' rooms in the dead of night hard enough to actually knock the doors right off of their hinges and then smash up their furniture. Because funny. And he was even linking up with other teammate Bunner Travers, where they would get dressed up as sailors before popping down to the dockyards in Durban so that they could apparently just pick random fights with random longshoremen. This wanton hooliganism would escalate even further when apparently on one occasion they all went down near Ellis Park and noted some gentlemen who were erecting some stands. Just what you would expect for a rugby stadium to do whilst it was hosting a tour. The thing was, however, that these gentlemen were apparently convicts, being essentially dragged out of their cells for a spot of good old-fashioned penal labour. And whilst they were snoozing under the scaffolding, the two goobers actually managed to befriend one of them. And it turns out that this criminal had actually been sentenced to prison for stealing some chickens. And as such, this prisoner was christened with the nickname Rooster. Blair and Bunner felt such deep sympathy for his cocking around by the South African penal system that they vowed to help free him. So they got him a bolt cutter and a change of clothes and actually helped the guy to escape. Yes, apparently this shit actually happened. But the escaped convict was caught just a day later, and it turned out that the jacket he was wearing had Blair's fucking name stitched to the inside of the collar. So Rooster's miraculous escape was very quickly linked back to Blair. And the tour management had to scramble to transfer and punish Blair before the South African government got any ideas about one of their players. So they shuffled him about and bunked him with fellow player and Presbyterian minister George Cromie in the hopes of not only getting him away from the presumed bad influence of Bunner, but also to hopefully make Blair find Presbyterian God and clean his fucking act up. That did not happen. Instead, one night, Blair apparently just decided to sneak out of an official dinner to go on a hunting trip with some of the lads. Then, he came back to their hotel room at 3 a.m. by kicking the door open with a dead antelope over his shoulders, telling the jump-scared Cromie that he had, quote, just shot a springbok. And for those of you who don't get the joke, the Springboks are the nickname for the South African rugby team. Upon being questioned, Paddy claimed that Jimmy Unwin has been complaining that the meat here isn't as fresh as back home. Then he proceeds to drag the carcass to Unwin's room. Kind of like a cat bringing you a dead bird into your room at 2 o'clock in the morning to make sure that you're well fed and actually know how to hunt. So Paddy dragged the carcass down the hall to his teammate's room, kicked the fucking door in, charged over to his friend's bed, and then chucked the fucking dead... and then chucked the fucking dead antelope right on top of him while he was sleeping. Unwin ended up scraping his leg off of the beast's horn, rendering him presumably unable to partake in the next day's game. In what may have been a rather rash decision, Paddy decided to dump the antelope's body right outside of the South African general manager's room with a note explaining that it was, quote, a gift of fresh meat from the British Isles touring team. To the surprise of absolutely fucking no one, Blair was then sent back to the ship to wait until the tour was over before fucking off back to Blighty with the rest of his team. Now, some of you may have noticed my rather heavy emphasis on apparentlys and supposedlys. And that's because there is a very good chance that Blair was just running his mouth and making a bunch of shit up. But as we will come to see, this sort of behaviour is hardly beyond the pale for him. Upon returning to Northern Iron, Blair found himself joining up with Malone RFC before going on to gain himself some additional praise for the 3 matches that he partook in for Ireland in 1939. With one report saying, Mayne, whose quiet, almost ruthless efficiency is in direct contrast to O'Loughlin's exuberance, appears on the slow side. But he covers the ground at an extraordinary speed for a man of his build, as many a 3/4 and fullback have discovered. That is to say that as far as this reporter was concerned, Blair Mayne was a genetic freak and not normal. In February of 1939, Blair would find himself in 4BN Extra Reserve Royal Ulster Rifles, based out of Newtonards, before getting a commission to join up with the Royal Artillery. Because it turns out that concurrently with all his stupid sporting shenanigans and his law degree, which he actually achieved just that year, he also became an officer cadet for the QUB contingent of the Officer Training Corps. Because of course, he was a fucking Rupert. After initially being posted to the 5th Light Anti-Aircraft Battery in the 8th Anti-Aircraft Regiment, Blair would then be transferred to the 66th Light AA Regiment, because the 8th were assigned to do some service overseas. Because you know it was 1939 and some shit was kicking off. And because Blair was a reservist, he had to stay on the Isles. Then, the war got big enough for everyone to be mobilised, so he was then transferred back to the RUR. Then, that great big hoo-ha in Dunkirk happened, when Britain and France got absolutely mollywopped by the Germans, literally just going around them, and then they only escaped because they had to drop all of their shit and pop in Baz's schooner across the channel. All whilst the French were actually trying their best to hold the line. But they failed to hold the Germans back and got subsequently occupied. Yes, that fat old drunk Winston Churchill was understandably very upset by this outcome. So he decided that Britain needed a new force to combat Jerry wherever he may be found, and hopefully raise the morale of the blackpilling Britons. Small and scrappy, disciplined, yet unpredictable. This would result in the formation of the Commandos. For which, yes, the current-day Royal Marines are the modern inheritors of, despite it originally being an all-branch service, alongside the Dutch and French outfits. But anyways, Blair joined up with them, being embedded with number 11 Scottish Commando, then being seconded to the Cameronians. He finally got to see some action in June of 1941 as a second lieutenant when 11 Commando partook in Operation Exporter, when British and Free French forces moved in to seize the currently Vichy-controlled territories of Syria and Lebanon, getting to successfully lead sections of men during the Battle of Litani River. Once again, doing such a good job that he was actually mentioned in dispatches afterwards. Now, we couldn't figure out exactly where Paddy's nickname of Paddy came from, but we think it might possibly have been when he was embedded with 11 Commando. Since it was a Scottish unit and he had a funny Irish accent, they might have just started calling him Paddy as a bit of a laugh, or as a bit of a hazing. Although, since it was a Scottish unit, it was probably both. Paddy seemingly invoked enough of a reputation in certain officer circles that his friend and fellow loyal Irishman, one Ewan McGonigal, had gone to the effort of recommending Paddy to one Scottish aristocrat turned Rupert by the name of Lieutenant Colonel David Stirling. You might have heard of him and his weird and quaint little parachuting unit. L Detachment, Special Air Service Brigade. Yeah, he founded the SAS. And Blair was just given the recommendation to join. You see, for context, the fledgling L Detachment was from the outset quite the unorthodox outfit, going out of their way to recruit oddballs, rogues, eccentrics, and misfits. Men who would not only come from all walks of life and were able to face down some really absurd operations, but also ones who were able and willing to think just a little smidge outside of the box when the situation demanded it. So, you'd imagine that the lawyer turned star athlete turned successful junior officer for the fucking Commandos no less would turn out to be quite the nice fucking fit, if you could believe it. So, when Paddy was approached about the deal, he accepted. Now, there's a little bit of a hubbub as to where he was when this proposition was posited. The main claim comes from the personal diary of Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Keyes, who, fun fact, was the youngest acting Lieutenant Colonel in the entire Empire at this point, being a spry 24 years old at the time of his death in November of 1941. He claims that Paddy Boy was inside the officers' mess for 11 Commando in Salamis, Cyprus, where, on the evening of June the 21st, 1941, Paddy had apparently beaten one Major Bevel Charles Napier to an absolute fucking pulp because he was really pissed off at the latter's absence during the raid on the Litani River. And because, and I shit you not, apparently Napier had shot Paddy's locally acquired pet dog when he was out on said raid. To which, you know what? Big F true, and he also fucking kinda deserved that, if it's true. Regardless, there was no evidence to suggest that Paddy Boy was arrested for this incident, though he was squarely taken right out of 11 Commando just in time to be parachuted into the newfound SAS, and to get to partake in their portion of the Western Desert Campaign. So, what the fuck did that entail? Well, the SES's main MO at this point in history was essentially hopping in a Pink Panther with the fellas, rocking a full swathe of firepower that would have even made the Yankees fucking blush, schmooze across the desert for a few days, taking in the sweet sight of absolutely utterly fuck all, eventually rocking up to a German airfield to which you and your sandy companions would then shoot the place the fuck up, destroying as much kit as you can, destroying as many aircraft as you could, and even killing as many Germans as you possibly could, before quickly whipping around and moseying your way back home. Sounds like a great laugh, doesn't it? Well, it turns out that this was actually quite serious business, and Paddy treated it that way, having apparently racked up a personal tally of over 100 enemy aircraft destroyed or rendered inoperable, going so far as to follow enemy combatants into their huts and then shooting them up whilst they slept, as well as ripping out components from enemy aircraft with his bare hands when they ran out of explosives. This managed to secure him a DSO and a promotion to lieutenant in December of 1941. Paddy was the unquestioning linchpin for many of the regiment's operations throughout the Second World War, leading many of their most successful raids personally, and in the process garnering himself something of a growing legend amongst the men. This would cause something of an issue for Big Dave Sterling, because he not only deeply disapproved of Paddy's propensity to partake in the ungentlemanly act of shooting up enemy billets whilst they were eating and evidently unarmed, or whilst they were fucking sleeping, having gunned down upwards of 20 people, equating that to an execution rather than a valid, good old British act of classic warfare. But Big Sterling also disliked the fact that the men liked Paddy more than they liked him. Because as much of a genius as Davy Boy was, he was also a Rupert that, due to having founded the outfit, had a few losses under his belt alongside some victories. Whilst Playboy Paddy had a seemingly perfect win streak that would even manifest in the belief that men under his command would feel invincible. Also, around this point, Paddy supposedly went on a drinking binge in Cairo that, for whatever reason, resulted in him trying to find and beat up BBC journalist Dick Dimbleby. Yells of based aside, the reasoning for this is actually rather sad, though I'll explain that later. The unkillable perception of the unit would be exemplified on the 26th of July 1942. When the SAS, alongside Free French forces, successfully raided the Sidi Hanesh airfield in the dead of night, storming the place with 18 jeeps and successfully destroying 37 Luftwaffe aircraft in just 15 minutes, losing only 3 jeeps and 2 men in the process. A stunning victory which both David and Paddy led, with the latter managing to add a tally to his kill count when he placed explosives in the engines of a parked bomber before doing his best Pee Wee Herman impression. This act of exemplary performance would end up having Paddy Boy becoming the de facto second in command of the entire regiment, being actually made official when in January of 1943, David Sterling went and got himself captured by the Italians. The Italians. Embarrassing. And he was then sent to a POW camp where he partook in 4 escape attempts, landing himself a lodging in the quaint and apparently inescapable Colditz Castle. This, paired with the regiment being reorganised into the Special Raiding Squadron and Boat Section respectively, meant that there would need to be a command presence. So therefore, Paddy was designated as the commanding officer for the entire raiding squadron, and in the process being given the rank of Major. Paddy would go on to lead his raiders on a tour of Italy, assisting the British forces in the region, as well as getting up to some shenanigans that resulted in him getting a bar added to his DSO. When, on the 10th of July 1943, Paddy successfully led the capture of multiple artillery batteries and the deaths of 200 to 300 Italian troops, alongside capturing and holding the town of Augusta in Sicily, and doing so via a naval landing in broad fucking daylight. And I mean, it doesn't take a genius to intuit that is incredibly fucking risky. Yet, they somehow still managed it. When Paddy was in Champs-Élysées after the liberation of Paris, he apparently was sitting amongst a group of local civilians when he decided to play what is presumed to be a rather sick joke. Paddy pulled out a fucking grenade that he had secretly removed the detonator for. He removed the pin and then placed the grenade right on the table that they were all sitting at. And when the grenade started smoking, everybody understandably fucking panicked and shit themselves and dove for cover. I'm only bringing this up because what the fuck was his problem? Paddy's legend would grow even further when in January of 1944 he was not only promoted yet again to Lieutenant Colonel, but was also appointed as the commanding officer for the entire regiment, which was now reformed into the 1st SAS Regiment. And Paddy led the outfit throughout the remainder of the war, including jaunts through the aforementioned France, alongside Norway, the Netherlands, some made-up place called Belgium, and even Germany itself, cementing the regiment, and by extension himself, as complete legends within the British military establishment, racking himself up 3 bars for his DSO. And, after leading 2 armoured jeep squadrons in Operation Howard, rescuing the pinned and wounded B squadron led by one Bond, Dick Bond, Paddy was officially cited by none other than Field Marshal Bernard Law Cromwell and Cork Montgomery himself. And he was recommended for none other than a Victoria Cross. He never got it. Not because he died or anything, I mean it was just procedure at the time to downgrade it into his 3rd bar for his DSO. This will be brought up again later though. But with the war's end in 1945, Paddy would partake in a side quest for the Falkland Islands Dependency Survey, being assigned as Deputy Expedition Leader, catching seals, dog sledding, and presumably charting out and taking a look at the very, very many Southern Island dependencies, under the command of Surgeon Captain Edward Bingham. Upon finishing up his South Atlantic shenanigans due to chronic back pain rendering him unable to go for a yomp, Paddy would find himself back in Northern Ireland, returning to Bangor. Yes, there is a Bangor there, not just in Wales and Maine. Then, Paddy went home to Newtownards, where he got himself a house, settled down, and resumed his original calling in life. Another place where wars are fought and where lives are ruined. Law. Paddy ended up becoming the secretary for the Law Society of Northern Ireland. He would also have picked up rugby again, but the aforementioned back pain was so fucking severe that Paddy wasn't even able to attend matches as just a spectator, let alone actually play in one. Yeah, come the war's end, Paddy wasn't doing too hot. As amongst the aforementioned physical tolls, the fact that his father had died in 1943 and he wasn't able to attend the funeral due to him being quite literally integral to a not insubstantial amount of the campaigns that he found himself in, unsurprisingly, this meant that as time marched on, Paddy became more reserved, retreating into the more literary arts, engrossing himself in books and poetry, seemingly leaving his brutish outbursts for the Germans. Except for when he tried to beat up the BBC journalist Dick Bimbleby, which Paddy tried to do because he was so grief-stricken from his father dying. Regardless, when Paddy got home, he, for the most part, just kept to himself. He didn't actually talk about what he got up to during the war because, fun fact, most actual Special Forces guys don't like talking about it. And if they do, there's a very good chance that they're Walter Mitty's. Or, in non-British Army jargon, a tactical bullshit merchant. It seems as though Paddy wasn't completely alone, however, as he managed to strike up a friendship with some fellas in a conveniently named Friendship Lodge. Because it turns out that our dear Paddy boy was a fucking Freemason come 1945, being initiated into Eclecticos Lodge number 542 and Friendship Lodge number 447, and rising the ranks in mainly fashion to Worshipful Master come 1954. You know for an absolute fact that he was running that lodge like he was still in North Africa. Or South Africa, for that matter. But sadly, it was when Paddy was returning from meeting up with a colleague in Bangor on the night of Tuesday the 13th of December 1955 that he was found dead in his Riley Roadster, having collided with either a stationary lorry or a fence, because it turns out that sources are quite unclear as to which it was. Either way, he was found at 4 a.m. with his skull split open on Mill Street in Newton Ards, dead at the age of 40. A sudden and unceremonious end for a man with as much main character syndrome as him. Naturally, the aftermath of his death was very much a calamity for the locals of Newton Ards, with his funeral procession being subject to hundreds of people all coming out to pay their respects, with the man himself being interred at Mavilla Abbey, laid to rest alongside the rest of his family in the churchyard. Now, obviously, Paddy Mayne has become something of a legend within Northern Ireland, with Newton Ards being host to a mighty bronze statue of Paddy Mayne, alongside a group dedicated to getting the man his posthumous Victoria Cross, with people still pushing, as of this video, to get him that greatest honour. So, if you want to help out with that, I don't know, go write a fucking letter or something. There's also a whole load of malarkey around a museum exhibit dedicated to Paddy Mayne. Turns out that government grants are riddled with red tape and are an incredible ball ache to figure out, let alone successfully apply for. Regardless though, despite the best wishes of the Northern Ireland Museums Council, the men and women of Northern Ireland still do their bit to remember this truly rogue hero. Oh yeah, and some of you probably know this story from that SAS historical drama that ran a few years ago, and it was actually rather good. Yeah, fun fact, Paddy Mayne was an actual guy. I know, crazy. But all of this is to say, I don't think he actually shot a springbok.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody subscribe!